the majority of hobbyists blame the lights first. Look, every light out there will work. Don't let somebody tell you otherwise. Welcome back to our channel. Here we are again in the Orlando store. Today we're going to break down the lighting concept. I like this one a lot because it's very controversial. So again, we'll focus very basically on the fundamentals of why we do certain things here at Worldwide Corals. Because I think that if there's any takeaway from it, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or an advanced hobbyist, there's an opportunity for you to find something to key in on that maybe be more appropriate for you in your reefing scenario. If we can talk today about why we here at Worldwide Corals do what we do, how we do that, and what types of lighting you can use to accomplish that, I think that's a really good basic start, because there's always specifics like spectrum and photo period length and intensities. I don't really want to get too far into that because they're all scenario based. However, if we talk about the real basics, I think that this can be a very useful video for people who are just getting into the hobby and want to avoid algae or any kind of ugly problems. 2, people who want to grow their corals that aren't necessarily growing their corals. And 3, people who are growing their corals but they're not coloring them properly. So it's all kind of netted together. But as you can see, I'm standing here in front of our Pentagon tank. It's a really good candidate to talk about because these lights are almost 5 feet off the surface of the water. So it is very eccentric. It's not your standard scenario, but guess what? It works. So obviously this tank is lit by radions. Super expensive light. I understand. I'm not promoting the product. I'm only saying that they work for us over the years, hence the reason why we use them. There's a lot of different options out there. You can use T5 lighting. You can use the China box LEDs. There's a whole bunch of different budget-friendly options out there, and trust me, I like that kind of product. DIY stuff, it all works, but the basics are they need to be able to change color from blue to white. I don't care if there's reds, there's greens, all those other colors in there, whatever. You need to be able to set the intensity on the blue channel and the white channel. And you need to be able to choose the length of photo period that the blue and the white run independently or together. So I'm not excluding anybody's lighting setup. I'm just saying that if you have a light that doesn't do those things, or you can't manipulate it so that it does, it's probably time to start thinking about investing in something that's going to be able to put you in that situation, because it will point you in the direction of success. The 3 main lights that we use here at Worldwide Corals are going to be Ecotech lights, AI lights, and Illumagic lights. Again, for the reasons that I just mentioned, they're controllable, both blue and white scheduling, and they give us a good spread in the scenario that we're using them in. Okay, so anybody who knows me knows I'm a doodler. Best way for me to explain something is to doodle it out. So we're gonna work out a couple concepts here. One, I wanna explain how I look at lighting so that it makes sense from a basic standpoint. So we're gonna talk about a graph. If you see an elevated part of a graph, it's gonna represent our peak intensity, which is generally going to be when we have a white or a full spectrum photo period. Now, obviously in a lighting graph, usually there's some sort of ramp period. I don't think much of that really matters. The way that I look at this is from this point to this point, or this point to this point, is a steady period of photosynthetic activity. So let's assume that we ramp for 30 minutes. We're on for 2 hours. This is blue before the white. This is, by the angle I drew here, maybe the same 30-minute ramp up to your peak photo period. So this is maybe a 3 or a 4 hour window of full spectrum. And then again, back down to a blue. Yours doesn't have to look like this. I'm not trying to explain how you should build out a lighting profile, but I'm only giving you an idea so that we can talk about what are controllables. Controllables are something that we change so we understand what the results will be in that scenario should we choose to do it again. So in the majority of our lighting schedules that we build here, or I build, whatever, we bring our lights on full tilt straight away. And we do this because it's before hours. We prefer to display our corals under blue. Yeah, there's no secret here. It hides algae, it hides some of the uglies. You can't hide anything in a full spectrum photo period, which is good. I mean, if you see a tank that looks really incredible under white lights, that person's really doing a good job. Most of our periods ramp down about 11 a.m., which is right when we open. And then they carry the rest of the day out and then off. So this plot and this plot represent 0%, okay? From here to here is our ramp period, and from here to here is our full spectrum. What we do in most situations, when we're trying to dial in growth, we're focused on this period. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6 hours. That's kind of a really good starting point. Me personally, I like a really long photo period of white, but we'll get into that later. And then the rest of the day is, call this 8 hours. And we shoot for no more than a 12-hour photo period. Again, you can do it however you want. This is just what we do here. I consider this a rest period. Okay, this is subtle photosynthetic activity, meaning the majority of the corals, whether it be low light, Cinerinas or Trachys or Elegants or Acanthophilias, those type of corals, you're going to find that they thrive in this window because they're not being punished by this high intensity light. Let's talk about a couple scenarios. Kind of like what we talked about in the first video. Let's say we're in that 8-month or less window. I suggest if you're going to build a lighting spectrum, it's going to be a minimal white intensity. And I have a couple profiles on the website that are similar to this. I think the Euphilia tank in the front of the store, so I think it's called the Ecotech display tank. That one has a very similar profile to this. It's 2XR15s. But you'll see, this is a really slight increase. So what it's doing is it's giving us a white photo period, but it's very marginal. The difference in intensity, if you were to stick a par meter in there from here to here, is very marginal. It's impactful because you're giving it the spectrum that we're looking for, but it's not strong. So this is like a really subtle format for somebody who just wants to do Zoas, Acanthos, Cinerinas. Even Euphilia can do well like this. But again, remember, when we get this really strong and lengthy, high intensity photo period, that's when you're going to get your growth and you're going to get your color, but you're also going to damage your corals if you're not set up to handle that yet. So let's say, like I said, 8 months. Your tank is 8 months. Remembering 12 hours. Remembering 4 to 6 hours. And then whatever this works out to be. Let's say after I'm now 10 months. I've got really good color. All my corals are happy. I don't really want to change anything, but I think I can get more out of it. What I'm going to suggest is just simply changing this intensity. And I'm going to show you on both the Ecotech app, the Delua app, and on the AI app how to change this. It's very, very simple. This photo period, I would go up 10% at a time for 1 month. Why? Because that's when you're going to show your successes. If you go up 10% and your corals say, I don't like it, then you know you got to go down 5% or something to that effect. But you can't do it if in the first couple of days, they already tell you it's too much. Let's say this was only 35%. You went up 10%. Now you're at 45 after a month. On the second month, you say, well, the corals are doing really good. I'm going to go to 55%. If it's a softie or an LPS tank, you probably aren't going to get much higher than that before you start seeing ill effect. What I would suggest is, instead of going to 65%, I would change this from 4 to 5 hours. And again, wait a month. This increases the length of peak photosynthetic activity. So for anybody, I referenced athletes before, the more you work out, the more calories you have to take in. It's no different. These corals are getting more nutrition by way of photosynthetic activity by every increase in length and intensity. Scenario number 2, you've got a problem. Let's say you're dealing with bleaching. Let's say you're dealing with algae. Let's say you're dealing with either small or pulled in corals. Let's say tucked in. I suggest in the same format, if your photo period looks like this, which is a very basic setup, Ecotech calls one AB+. What this is a full spectrum of 20K for whatever period this is. And then the ramp from here to here, either on the front and on the back. What's happening is they're being subjected to the same intensity for this entire length of time. My suggestion is to break this apart either one of two ways. Either bring the overall intensity down by a fairly significant percentage, call it 25% from where you currently are, or keep this same peak intensity and cut off the whites like my previous graph. Now you're taking that peak intensity and only allowing it to happen for a shorter period of time because the blue is more subtle in the graph. So don't forget that. All your full spectrum is going to promote bleaching. It's going to promote algae, and it's going to promote corals being sucked in and small. Why? Because it's strong and it's intense. Along the same lines, if you're going to take a coral that's looking really rough, you're not sure why, your first thing that you're going to do is put it into lower light and lower flow. How many of you have tucked a coral in the cave hoping to save it? Well, chances are that's a better scenario for the coral than this is. And we'll talk about one more scenario just so that you understand the fundamental concept here. I'm not telling you how to take care of your corals, but I'm telling you optimal situations are understanding the controls. Let's say you're a stony person. In the last video, I talked about fundamentals being the reason why your tank isn't right. And in some of the comments, I read things like trace elements and moonshiners, all super valid. Don't get me wrong. But we're trying to eliminate that from the conversation right now because that's more of an experience topic. Until you're growing corals really well and you're growing corals with color, we're not going to go there. Let's assume that you're a stony person. You love stony corals, Monopora, Acropora, Leptoceras, Cyphastria, all these corals that have less fleshy tissue, smaller polyps. Not all of them want to live in the same world. If they're stony and they're small polyp, that doesn't mean they're all highlight and high flow. This is only going to be Acropora. And yes, there's outliers. There's some that aren't necessarily fitting that characteristic. But let's just say, generally speaking, Acropora are highlight, high flow. Leptoceras, lower to medium light, lower to medium flow. Cyphastria, Leptoceras, Montipora, bird's nest. Bird's nest is not an Acropora. Bird's nest digitata, just because it's a branching stony coral doesn't mean that it's a highlight, high flow coral. This is almost only Acropora. This is everything else. My suggestion here is if you're a stony person and you're getting good growth and you're not getting the color that you're looking for, I would honestly say focus on the total intensity. Total intensity means you've got a puck of diodes or a panel of diodes, whatever type of light that you have. Each one of them are controllable by a percentage. The fixture has a certain amount of wattage. What this total intensity bar means is that you're controlling each one of these unanimously to decrease or increase the wattage that it's putting out. When you control each one of those diodes individually, that is going to form your spectrum. So spectrum is the difference between this and this. White spectrum or full color spectrum, and blue spectrum. Multiple colors in this range, multiple colors in this range. So this change is spectrum, this is intensity. I would drop the whole entire thing by a percentage. 10% for easy figuring again. If we drop the entire graph, top and bottom, by 10%, what that's doing is, if this here is 100% full spectrum, this here is 100% blue spectrum, the only difference between here and here is this is less the colors in the full spectrum. If you omit the reds, the greens, the whites, the cool whites, and keep the blues at 100%, there's a pretty good chance that you're only here to here using 50% of this wattage. So now, if you keep your graph looking the same, and you drop it by 10%, this goes down to 90%, and this goes down to 90%. Now here, you're using less than 50% of its total wattage. That's just a very basic explanation there for those of you who don't understand why things are graphed like that and what the color channels do. You're a stony person. You're not getting the color that you want, and your acropora are looking phenomenal, but your other stony corals aren't. Pretty good chance dropping the light's gonna fix things, or it's definitely gonna help. Let's say your stony coral acros aren't doing as well as you want them to, and obviously neither are the rest of the stony corals. Pretty good chance dropping the light total is going to help the situation, but you have to wait 1 month. And because this is so controlled from here to here and here to here, and it's not a graph like this, like I've seen a million times, how do we know what the benefit is of this peak? How do we know what the benefit is of this peak? This is uncontrolled to me. And while maybe they look good and maybe they're very functional, I don't like it because it's hard for me to troubleshoot problems. Just the same as I explained here by cutting the lights down, if you've got really good color and minimal growth, there's a pretty good chance if you're already plus 6 hours of peak photo period, there's a good chance that you may just need to turn up your total intensity on the entire graph in order to get better growth. Just remember a couple of key factors. If you're increasing light, which is opposite of what we've talked about this entire time, if you're increasing light, you're gonna go back to maybe you get algae. Let it come, deal with it naturally with whatever predation you can. Let it run through its phase. There's a good chance you're gonna see more algae than you're used to. You may have a little bit more paleness in your corals. It's a really good chance, if you're increasing the light, that this is gonna happen. Just remember, let it go through its phase. If it's really, really bad, obviously you gotta turn the lights down, but let them pale just a little bit for the sake of gain. Because you can always increase just a small amount of feeding, and you can gain that back. What I'm not telling you to do is to make 2 changes at once. All I'm saying is make a slight variation to your feeding schedule in order to accommodate a paler coral, and this could get everything back and then some that you didn't have before. I think we can talk about some of the apps, and that's enough. I mean, that's a lot in one video. So let's go take a look at some of the apps. Okay, so obviously we're back in front of our 4000. Man, the coral line is really starting to take off. So I think we're ready to start adding some corals. So it's a good chance for me to show you guys what kind of lighting setup that we're running here on this tank. If you look up top, there is 48 Illumagic X4s. I like these lights, and what I want to do is I want to go over how simple the app is. And the reason for that is because if we go back to just what we were talking about in the conference room when I was drawing on the board, the way that they use a graph is very, very, very similar to what I try to explain when I think about lighting and its graphing. In their app, they have 3 different color channels. One's more of a UV, one's more of a blue, and one's more of a full spectrum. That being said, when we create a program, we're going to schedule control. We're going to create a schedule. Let's say I want to create my own. Okay, I'm going to do it as an advanced hobbyist so that it shows here on the graph. I want my start time, let's just say 8 o'clock in the morning. And the end of my first plot, let's say I want it 12. Okay, I'm going to program these 3 colors. What I'm going to do, based on what I explained in the conference room on the board, is I'm going to go straight to a full spectrum. Let's say I do 50, and we're going to do this quick without being very precise. 50, 50, and 50 across the board. Okay? Now you see, it shows the base is 0, the top is 50. So my plot number 2 is 50% to the end of my top plateau. So I'm going to say setting it for 3 hours. So from 12 to 4, my time is 50. Same thing, 50 and 50. So now I have a block that is the same, 50%. Now I'm going down to only blue and UVs. I'm omitting my full spectrum on the next plot. And then the end of my day, we close at 7 o'clock, 1900 hours is 0. So if you look here on the graph, I have my peak period at 50% everything. And then you can see the yellow line disappears here in this next plot. So that is all blue and then off at 7 o'clock my time. Very, very simple. And you can see here, I've got 48 lights. I'm asking them all to communicate. I've actually got 2 that are unplugged right now. This is awesome, man. We're really, really ready for corals. So obviously this is not the schedule that we're running. As soon as we're up and operational and we've got corals in the tank, we're going to share this profile also to our website. Okay, so we talked about how to program a lighting template on the Delua app. Now this is the Mobius app. I talked about total intensity before. You can see we run it at 100%. Why? Because it's less of a variable. I know that if I turn this one up on this point intensity to 100%, I have 100% of that channel being used. Similar to what we talked to in the conference room. This is our graph where we bring in the full spectrum early on. What we're doing here is you're going to see that that point intensity is 100%, and I'm running all my blues at 100%, and my full spectrum colors all at 55%. And it's no different. So that's the first part of my upper plateau, and then there's the second part of my upper plateau. You can see that went from 8 in the morning until 1 o'clock. So this one's a little bit longer than 11, like I explained. But also remember, these are 5 feet off the surface of the water. Then it drops down into no full spectrum, still at 100%. So I'm using these blue channels to their peak capacity. And then we shut off just before 7 o'clock. So they start to ramp down for what looks like 23 minutes before we close. So our graph is nothing more than the upper white photo period, the lower white photo period, and then off. So it's very, very basic. In the event that I'm trying to kick off more growth in this tank, chances are I would either have to add more lights or extend my white photo period longer. In this case, we've kind of reached that capacity. This tank is running about as optimally as we can get it. So now you know Mobius also does AI, so we can take a quick look at the AI template as well. What do you got going on here?
Oh man, you guys caught me at the craziest time. I'm doing a water change. I am actually fragging small pieces of aquaporas. We're getting a collection of about 150 different aquaporas. They're going in the 4,000, and this is my little donation here. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pieces.
Man, you definitely got a lot going on over here.
Can you tell?
We came at a good time. But for the purpose here, we said we wanted to talk about AI because we went over Delua, we went over Radion, and now we're going over AI. So same thing, it's still in Mobius, but the graph looks a little bit different. So the way that this looks here, it's kind of backwards from what we normally do, because if you look at this section here, and you go and open up the edit, you're gonna see that the whites are off. We did this because he was already feeling like there was a little bit too much white or a little bit too much light in general, because we've got the XR30s also, which are plenty enough for the tank by itself. We have from this plot, which is 8 o'clock in the morning, until 10 o'clock in the morning, it's all blue. So his lights come on blue and they switch to a white. In this case, it's not white, it was, so that's why there's the break. Otherwise, it would just be flat across. So we're actually cutting the intensity a little bit. So if you remember what we were talking about with total wattage, since there's only 3 colored diodes in the fixture, he has 125% on the 2 blues and 0 on the white. And then here, this is 100 because this is where there was white. We didn't change it, we just pulled it out. So not only is there less white, but there's less total intensity during that period. It's kind of a backwards way of doing it, but we did this because when we go to implement white again, I know that this is the plot and this is the plot where we will add it back to the schedule. So same as the Ecotech profile, it's an off at 7:45, it ramps for 15 minutes to 8, goes to blue. In a normal scenario, this would be where we would have our white from 10 to 12:30. It goes back to blue and it carries blue the rest of the day. So it's very consistent with the way that we do a schedule here. It's flat so that it's controlled, it's quick on, quick off, and we adjust intensity and length of period between white and blue to accommodate our needs as the tanks change. Let me just in a nutshell say the majority of hobbyists blame the lights first. And we talked about lights first out of the other 6 elements that we talked about in the first video because it tends to be the most complicated. And hopefully I did a decent job of explaining things in a simpler form so that everybody can digest the information and use it however they deem necessary. Because I don't want to point the finger at lighting all the time. I think as long as everything else is on par, lighting is an adjustment to get better performance, I guess, out of your aquarium or your coral growth and color. It should be looked at as the very last element of the basic fundamentals because corals can grow under almost every light. It doesn't matter, like we talked about earlier, whether it's T5 or halide, cheap LED, expensive LED, incandescent lights. I mean, there was a point where we were growing corals way early on under the cheapest, most affordable lights that we could because we didn't know the first thing about spectrum. So that being said, I hope today was kind of enlightening or at least useful to somebody in one way, shape, or form. And I think that if I can leave the one real main takeaway, or maybe two, is don't blame the lights first, and only utilize them to, one, fix a problem, or two, have a better understanding of what it is that you're doing, so that later on you have the information to go back on and say, I really think, since I only changed one thing, this was the leading reason for that to happen, whatever it may be. For anybody out there that wants to be budget conscious, look, every light out there will work. Don't let somebody tell you otherwise. You have to solve a problem in order to know for sure that the light is the culprit. I think it would be really cool to do a simple experiment here around the shop and put a very budget-friendly light on an aquarium and grow really nice, expensive corals, just to show that it can be done. Because there's a different way to do everything. More often than not, people are looking at the fact that we have expensive lights on our tank because that's the only way to do things, and that's not true. We do it because they don't break. We do it because they're functional to the point that we need them to be, and they look good. So yeah, I mean, I'm that guy. I run cheap everything on my stuff. Why? Because I know it still works, and I know I don't have to spend the money in order to get the same results. For those of you who enjoy this kind of content, I really appreciate you coming back. Like I said, if it's not in your wheelhouse, go watch Vic. He's way more entertaining. I like watching him too. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Come see us at Reefapalooza. We've got a killer setup going out, and definitely take note of the fact that your corals tell you the answer. Be more in tune with them, because if you are, and you know what a coral looks like at its best, and you know what it looks like at its worst, you know to shoot for somewhere in between and then work to make it better. So that being said, thanks for watching. See you next time.